Alright guys, Alright, so just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Farhan. I'm the president of the Muslim Student Association here at UNSW. So I just wanted to really welcome you guys to our Jesus Awareness Week finale. So this event is essentially going to be an interfaith panel representing the three Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Judaism and Christianity. Firstly, I just want to start by thanking Campus Bible Study and AUJS, the Australasian Australasian Union of Jewish Students, I just want to thank you guys. Also, really want to thank our guest speakers, Andrew, Rabbi Eli, Raghu is our moderator, and also Abdullah Kunde. Dr. Abdullah Kunde will be joining us virtually via Zoom soon, inshallah. So, just to really quickly go over the structure of today's event, we're going to first begin by having like a really short Quran recitation of Surah Maryam. After that, we'll get Raghu to start off the moderated discussion. At around 7:10, 7:15ish, we'll take a break for prayer. And then we'll get back into the moderated discussions. And basically, around 8 o'clock-ish, we'll open the floor for Q&A. So that's in terms of structure. Now, in terms of housekeeping rules, the snacks which are being served, like cakes, chips, coffee, tea, drinks, whatever, those are all being served at the back, just outside this lecture hall. There are toilets on the left-hand side, right outside, and we'll also inshallah be praying Maghrib. For the Muslims, we'll be praying Maghrib also on the left-hand side, right outside. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Hashim to get started with the Quran recitation, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واذكر في الكتاب مريم إذ انتبذت من أهلها مكانا شرقيا فاتخذت من دونهم حجابا فأرسلنا إليها روحنا فتمثل لها بشرا سويا قالت إني أعوذ بالرحمن منك إن كنت تقيا قال إنما أنا رسول ربك لأهب لك غلاما زكيا قالت إني إن أنى يكون لي غلام ولم يمسسني بشر ولم أك بغيا قال كذلك قال ربك وعلي هين ولنجعله آية للناس ورحمة منا وكان أمرا مقضيا فحملته فانتبذت به مكانا قصيا فأجاءها المخاض إلى جذع النخلة قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا فناداها من تحتها ألا تحزني قد جعل ربك تحتك سريا وهزي إليك بجذع النخلة تساقط عليك رطبا جنيا فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما فلن أكلم اليوم إنسيا فأتت به قومها تحمله قالوا يا مريم لقد جئت شيئا فريا يا أخت هارون ما كان أبوك امرأ سوء وما كانت أمك بغيا فأشارت إليه قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا وبرا بوالدتي ولم يجعلني جبارا شقيا والسلام علي يوم ولدت ويوم أموت ويوم أبعث حيا ذلك عيسى ابن مريم قول الحق الذي فيه يمترون ما كان لله أن يتخذ من ولد سبحانه إذا قضى أمرا فإنما يقول له كن فيكون وإن الله ربي وربكم فاعبدوه هذا صراط مستقيم.
Thank you, Hashi, for the beautiful and moving recitation. Before I hand it over to Raheem, I'd just like to quickly say, we'd really appreciate it if you guys could leave all your questions for the Q&A section, which will begin at around like 8 o'clock. But during the event, if any question sort of like comes up, feel free to go into the slider link with the following code, like 300770, and you can basically start entering your questions there, basically like from now. And then inshallah at around like 8 o'clock, that's when we'll start like going over the questions. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Raheem to get the event kickstarted.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Farhan, and assalamu alaikum to everyone. Thank you all for coming. And I do want to extend my gratitude to Farhan for inviting and sort of initiating this. I don't think presidents of MSAs get enough credit for the hard work that they do. And I've seen Farhan grow from a very bright youngster, probably one of the brightest people I've ever met, to a very mature, responsible president of the MSA. And so honestly, props to him. I'm really proud of him, Faz. First things first, I'm going to be a bit honest. Make a confession. I usually am a little bit cynical of dialogues, especially interfaith dialogues. Whenever we hosted them at Sydney University, there was this reluctant kind of, all right, let's get this sort of kumbaya dance out of the way. And it's not that they're pretentious, because I think most parties that are involved do this with a level of, they come in quite genuine about it. And they come in genuine, invested in the discussion, but all too often they're quite performative. And although dialogue has some limited utility, it's great therapy, and it's great for public relations, right? Once you take the photos, and really the politics of, I guess, working together rather than actually working together, right? The politics of performing that work. So I'm hoping that tonight is going to be a little bit different. I'm really hoping. How are we doing for audio? Doing all right? All good? Okay. I really think our individual faith communities deserve better than just a dialogue. I think it deserves a dialectic. Because a dialogue on its own is at most therapeutic. It's comforting, and it prioritizes agreeability over clarity. But a dialectic is something completely different. A dialectic, it's got movement. It's got inertia. It tries to solve, it tries to resolve. It locates shared interests and finds means of cooperation. And when it's necessary, it finds the genealogy of conflict, and it draws the necessary battle lines and peace treaties. That's what dialectic does. And tonight, we're not going to be solving any grand and ancient problems. There's no chance. But at the very least, we can try and get some clarity about this dialectic, about what sort of tri-faith dialectic might look like. And at the very least, we can get moving forward in this regard. And I'm hopeful that we as faith-based communities can grow and mature and have these fruitful dialectics for us. So I'm going to introduce the speakers real quick. Rabbi Eli Feldman. I'm not sure if we've ever met in person, but I've heard your name fly around for a very long time. He's the chief minister at the Newtown Synagogue, Jewish chaplain at UNSW, and I don't think it's just UNSW either, it's UC as well, and a couple of others. He's director of Young Adult Shabbat. He's previously served in a range of communal leadership positions, including as vice president of the Rabbinical Society of New South Wales, Council of New South Wales, and the director of the Sydney Talmudical, I don't know if I said that correctly.
Not bad.
No, okay, I'll take it. Talmudical College Association. To my most left, we've got Andrew Barrick. He's a Christian who's in training to be a church, did I pronounce it correctly?
That's okay. Andrew is fine.
Andrew, awesome. And he's in training to be a church minister with sort of campus Bible study. And he loves to talk about the Bible and read it with the students. And he lives in the new college village as a ministry resident, and he attends Uni Church. And we've got Abdullah Kunde, who I was really hoping would be here in person, but
on your most left.
Yeah, on my most left, exactly right. But Abdullah Kunde has put a lot of hard work in. I think he's joining us all the way from Newcastle. So thanks Abdullah for coming, and he's engaged. He's sort of old timer. Not to call him old, because you're not old. You're looking quite well. Quite good to be around for it, because I've seen him around since the early 2010s. He's a Muslim who engaged in several interfaith dialogues in the past. He's done debates. He's facilitated courses on Islam. He's interacted with other religions, most notably with the likes of James R. White and Samuel Green. In my day, back when we were at the MSA back in 2011, 2014, he was sort of a regular speaker that we would try our best to get our hands on this guy, but usually it's quite difficult to get your hands on. So good stuff, Faz, for getting him. Look, I'll get the discussion sort of started off, and a quick structure about how we're going to do it. Maghrib is in what, 15, 20 minutes?
I think 7 o'clock.
Yeah, so we'll get a preliminary discussion just started. And the first question I had is about truth, right? About truth, about what our three religions have to say about the nature of truth. Because we live in an era where lived experience has primacy. It has subjective individual truths has the most political, social, and epistemic currency. And it's really come at the forefront in place of and supplementing very old school ideas about transcendental truths, right? Truths that are meant to be eternal, truths that are meant to be like untouchable, right? So this is God, there is one God. Jesus was a messenger, Jesus was son. God as divine commander, God as the guider, giver and shaper of law. These old school ideas about unity and a truth that's external to the human mind. I sort of want to get a feeling about where the three traditions lie on the nature of truth. So I mean, Rabbi, if you don't mind kickstarting discussion off, that'd be great.
I think that on this issue, I'm just moving for Abdullah so he'll be able to see. I think on this issue of truth, from a Jewish perspective, we have a prayer that we say a few times a day called the Shema, which is basic prayer, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. I'm sure you're familiar with that sentence. And then, of course, there's a bunch of paragraphs we say after that. And it concludes with the words, Hashem Elokeichem Emet, which means God, your God is true. And so from a Jewish point of view, and I think that other faiths would concur, from our point of view, the only thing that's actually true is God. Because God is eternal. And nothing else is eternal. So the physical, this cup, it's here, but it's not eternal. So it gets created at one point, it disintegrates at another point. So the fact that it's here, it is truly here, but it will never truly always be here. The only thing that is absolutely true and will never change is God. And so there's a concept in Jewish law called Nahoras of Chazvin. We have in Jewish tradition something called a mikvah, which is a place where people go to purify themselves. You have the concept in Christianity, the idea of baptism. You have, I'm not sure if you have those concepts in Islam, but the idea of water as a place of purification, spiritual purification. And in Jewish tradition, you're only allowed to immerse in a mikvah, which comes from natural water, which is either rainwater or like a natural spring, a wellspring, or an ocean, and that type of thing. What happens is an interesting discussion in our tradition, that is, what happens if you have a river that dries up, dries up once in a while and then it flows again, so it sometimes flows and sometimes it doesn't. And in Jewish tradition that's called Nahoras and Mechazim, it's called false rivers. It's not true because it's not constant, it's not always. And so the idea of something true is that it always, the real truth is something that was, is, and always will be. And from our point of view, that's the only real truth is God.
Mostly agree. Only things that are eternal can be true forever. But there's not just absolute truth in that sense. There's also the truth that we believe is also absolutely true about who God is. So not only is God truth, but actually our trust in God also formulates and fits into that part of truth. Jesus says in John chapter 8, he talks about, he's talking to the crowd there, and he says, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And so in one sense, there's a knowledge and understanding of the truth that in itself is truth. And so it's not just the truths of who God is, but if we understand and believe those truths, then those things are also true. And so in one sense, there is an aspect of truth to lived experience, but we don't place it above all other truth. The way God's revealed himself to us is also true, because the way the true God reveals himself has to be true.
Sorry, I just want to say quickly, I'm very happy to see smiling face, Ellie, and Andrew. It's nice to meet you all, albeit electronically, for the first time. Spoilers for the Christians in the room, but we'll probably be hearing a lot tonight of the similarities between Judaism and Islam. So I could have almost given Ellie's response without the term specific to Judaism and said that's exactly the Islamic position. So the Islamic position is that truth, al-haq, is objective, and indeed al-haq is one of the names of God. And God being the necessarily existent being, nothing else being necessary, means that He is the only absolute truth. We also have a concept of things that are true for us, but but they're not the same as something that is actually true, i.e. God. And the simple example would be, it's true for me that my clothes are in my cupboard, but that's not always going to be true. And just because I may believe that it's true in the morning when I wake up, well, perhaps they're not there. Perhaps one of my children have moved my clothes and put them somewhere else. So simply for us, there is objective truth, that is God, and then also things that God informs us about. We believe that everything that He informs us is absolutely true, and that's.
I didn't realize. Okay, continue.
Do you want to?
I think I'll probably finish there. We can move on to the next question, Rago.
Yeah, so just expanding on that, if God is truth, then we can agree that there's a transcendental external being that is constant. Do we carry that same conviction of truth about law, about the laws and the injunctions that each of the religions provide? Can we go in the same order? Are we going in order of like revealed religion?
We've got the other way this time. We'll start with you, Abdullah.
Go in reverse then. As I said, we believe necessarily that what God says or what He informs us about is true, and therefore there are objective truths in in the way the world works, in particular historical facts. So certainly for us as Muslims, the prophets who have been named in the Quran, they are objective facts of history as personalities. They're not just metaphorical stories used to convey a general moral message, and so on. Now there are some, shall we say, subjective truths. So Eli's brought up the concept of the mikvah. The parallel concept in Islam is ghusl or wudu, using water for purification prior to worship. And I'm sure anyone who wants to help themselves go to sleep at night can read about 7 different types of water that are pure and purified in the Hanafi method. Now that's a subjective truth per se, in that whilst it's based on revelation, is ultimately up to a bit of conjecture. So again, using sort of the analogy that Eli used, if we have a temporary body of water that is conceivably a pure and purifying substance, then we can probably use it. But then again, there are sort of subjective exceptions to that rule, and different interpreters of the law have given slightly different opinions about those things. But that's why we say, well, we always return to the objective foundations, and I guess then go from there when trying to consider questions in day-to-day life.
I think in terms of the law and the laws of the religion, Jesus himself says not one iota, which is like the dot of an I, will be removed from the law, in one sense affirming its truth, but he talks about its fulfillment. And so in one sense, we sort of hinted at it when we said, in terms of revealed truth, as sort of God reveals himself to us, the things reach a finality and an end point, and things change. For example, Rabbi might not agree about something that I believe about Jesus, but I think that what Rabbi believes might be true, and it's revealed in Jesus. And so, as things are fulfilled, the truth becomes more and more clear. And so, if you read sort of one verse from the Bible or one verse from from the Torah or one verse from the Quran, you don't learn a lot about the Bible, about who God is, but it's still true as you sort of read more and as God reveals himself through the Bible, you learn more about who he is and you learn more about his truth.
Just getting a bit more specific in relation to the law, which is what you asked about. People are familiar with the Ten Commandments, right? I mean, that's something which is basic to Judaism. Christianity honours it. I think there's many aspects to it which Islam would honour as well, and see it's important, the belief in one God and not worshipping idols and that type of thing. And there are certain commandments in there, instructions as to how we should live our life. Don't steal, don't kill, honour your parents. Now, these are things which are objectively true instructions, which we believe are just as relevant today as they were given to us thousands of years ago. The idea that we don't have the right to take away someone else's life for any reason other than, of course, self-defense or that type of thing. But as far as murder is a crime, and it always was and always will be, and that's never going to change. Theft is a crime. I can't go put my hand in someone else's pocket and take $5 out of it without their consent, right? That's a crime. It's their possession. That's a law that God has given to us thousands of years ago, and it's as true today as it was then. Thousands of years ago there wasn't cash currency. It wasn't about, it was stealing the other guy's donkey, but the concept is the same. Maybe the application might be applied differently. Honour your parents. 2,000 to 3,000 years ago that meant go visit them every day and bring them a cup of tea. Today maybe that means pick up the phone and call them, and give them that respect. So the application of the law may be different, but the essence of it, the basic morals and ethics that the religions are, or at least I'm talking from a Jewish perspective, but I'm sure that would echo among the other faiths as well. The basic morals and ethics, they are as true today as they were when they were given, and those laws contain great guidance and inspiration and wisdom how we should live our lives.
Yeah, awesome. That leads very naturally to my next question. So if there is an external transcendental truth, there are mechanisms in each religion to ascertain that truth in terms of how it's projected onto us as slaves of God, I guess, to abide by in terms of law. Now, that sort of brings me to an interesting observation. I made this a couple of years ago when I realized, it sounds funny, but it's like Islam is kind of like iOS 3.0 update, right? And Christianity is iOS 2.0, right?
With the original version.
Yeah, I guess. I guess, what I mean?
We like Apple IIe,
Precisely. So, but, with each update, there may have been variances in sort of the applicability, the application of the law. But there are certain things that are constant across the three religions. And if there is, I kind of imagine a Venn diagram, right? Of course I imagine a Venn diagram. But I imagine a Venn diagram where I guess there's three intersecting sets of values, laws, norms, institutional enforcements of those norms. And then there's like this area in between that the three religions are coming together on. Family, life, arguably property, right? And I guess I want to hear more about what that intersection looks like for, I guess, the vision of these three speakers, and what that might mean for us as religious communities. Negotiating, I think, a terrain that's quite hostile to faith-based communities. I don't know if it's shared that way with the Christians and the Jewish society, but definitely in the Muslim community, there is a feeling that there is a hostility by an external, I guess, the forces of modernity that is quite antagonistic to many of the norms and the values that tradition and the classical scriptures endorse. So I'm not too sure about which order. I'm more than happy to just
start with that.
Could you summarize the question again?
Yeah. So what do you think are some of the core values that are across the three religions that is like, now that's external transcendental truth? We can all agree on it. Like, I might not agree on the specifics of Judaism, but if Judaism says X about family, so does Christianity, so does Muslims, right? Then, irrespective of whatever, everyone in this room that abides by these three faiths, we can all agree on
Yeah.
that one intersecting thing. So what are some of those things in that intersecting grade?
So in one sense, there are the external things, and there are some of the theological things that we might agree on. For example, Christians will say God is one. The way that we will say it might be different, but we will say that. And so that's a theological truth that we will all agree on, that God is one. But in terms of external to the religions, sort of the nuclear family being the best way to raise children is something we definitely agree on. Sort of the security of sort of things, and so the need to provide for those who are vulnerable, I think, is pretty constant. And so Paul, the Apostle Paul, talks about giving to the poor. The Jewish Torah talks about not gleaning over your vineyards multiple times, to leave some for the foreigner and those who are poor. And in Islam, you talk about giving to charity as a way of sort of providing for the poor, and that vulnerable people who cannot provide for themselves are to be cared for by other people. I think that's an external transcendental truth that differs from our regardless of our theology, we'll all agree on that sort of thing together. And so how we get there might be different, but we all get there to that sort of point. Those are just two that I can think of off the top of my head. There are plenty more, and so I think we can agree on a massive amount of things. We're privileged enough to be sitting in the eastern suburbs. There are Jewish schools here. I grew up in Parramatta. There are Muslim schools around the corner of me in Auburn, and I went to a Christian school. And so we agree that we should be able to teach our children what we believe, and that we want to raise our children properly with what we believe, and that faith is important to them. So I think all three of us agree on that.
Thank you very much. I think that there's no question when we compare believers to non-believers or not yet believers, I'd like to say, that what unites us is far greater than what divides us. Because essentially, the common denominator amongst, whether it's Muslims, Christians, Jews, the common denominator is we believe that life was created by God for a purpose, and we are here for a purpose, and the world has a meaning. The world has there's a trajectory of history. We believe that we're coming from somewhere, we're going to somewhere, we're here to make this world a better place. We are partners with God in making this world a better place, whether it's through, as Andrew was saying, acts of charity, kindness, helping the poor, the widow, the orphan, clothing the naked, feeding the hungry. We are partners with God in the process of creation. And so we don't see the world as a random sort of some dust particles came together and there was a big bang and that's we're here, and it's all just theory of evolution, and it's all very random and there's no real ultimate purpose by it because there's no intelligent design. We believe there is a intelligent architect of creation called God. Whether we call him Allah, we call him God, or as Andrew was saying, we believe that that force is one, and that force has created us, put us here for a reason, and given us direction and instruction how to live our lives and how to make this world a beautiful place. And I think those are things that we can all agree on, and we all do agree on, and are fundamental to our lifestyle as well. Because when you believe that you're not just here, for a good time, you're here to actually make a meaningful difference in this world by a creator God who has made you as his partner in life, then life takes on so much more deeper levels of meaning and purpose. I think Abdul.
Yeah, I think I agree with that completely, 100%. The unifying factor is that we were created intentionally and with a purpose, and that meaning and the objectives that then stem from that meaning differentiate us from, as Eli put it, those that don't yet believe. I think that there are always going to be estranged interests, and we might as well acknowledge that early, that that we will have critical differences in our our beliefs about God, in our day-to-day life, and in fact, I guess Islam doesn't essentially view the nuclear family as the most ideal make-up for a family, or as the only option, for making up a family, as an example. But by having that foundation of an intentionality to our existence and a meaning for that existence, I think that we can hopefully foster situations where we can gloss over those estranged interests when it's appropriate to do so, and when it's beneficial for the world to do so. Roger, we're talking about the need, I guess, to really sort of be open and honest about those estranged interests, and I think you said the loving, that the loving is not beneficial. Well, I mean, if we talk about, say, the city that is common to the three faiths represented today, just in the past few weeks has seen a number of attacks, where people have been killed, stabbed, shot, unfortunately, and at the same time, there's currently a polio epidemic in the area as well, and obviously that's on top of the COVID stuff and everything else that's happening. Well, I think the area will be doing a lot better if we're all able to get together and love Him, so to speak, than people focusing on the estranged interests. And really, I mean, that's the radical thing about monotheism, right? Like, that is the remarkable thing about belief in one God. We necessarily all have the same origin. We necessarily all have the same responsibilities to one another, regardless of what we believe or how we choose to live our life. Those foundational, objective moral principles that Eli was referring to. I've kind of used an almost parody story before, of saying that the difference between us as monotheists and the pagans of the past, and the neo-pagans, are that when we see someone washed up on the shore, we don't say, oh, that's Poseidon, and he's not a god that I worship, I don't need to help this person. Or we don't see a homeless individual and say, oh, they're supported by a particular god, we have another one. There's something remarkably radical about monotheism, in that it necessitates that we all have the same origin, and therefore all have the same moral responsibility to one another. And as I said, I think if we can gloss over the estranged interests, that are permanently there to facilitate more of a loving, well, then perhaps we will achieve that objective of having a better world.
Awesome. Look, I think your answers, to be honest, have all raised more questions than they have, and it's a sign of a good discussion to come, which I'm really looking forward to, because there was something that Rabbi, you said, which is what unites us is more than what divides us. Given what's happening internationally, that's a big claim, right?
Stand by.
Yeah, I'm willing to see how that could be stood by. You were talking about the nuclear family being the central, I guess, something that all three religions can get back behind, and I'm curious to see what you mean by the nuclear family, what that looks like, what the role of mother, father, daughter, son, husband, wife, these elements might overlap. And also what you mentioned earlier about Islamic, Jewish and Christian schools. Obviously the religious discrimination bill and the controversies around it, that's something that I do want to get into as well. So Really looking forward to the second half of the discussion. I think it's a good time for us to take a bit of a breather, take a prayer break. How long?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, alright. So 20 minutes. Yeah, look, we just got half past strictly, yeah? Yeah, 7:30 straight. Alright.
Thanks, bro. Good to see you.
So I'm going to be quite busy this week, but next week I'm pretty good. Have you got a sweet spot yet? It is. No, she's a wrong. She's talking shit. So I spoke to the chef, and I called him again. No, I called him right, and she says. No, but see, I can't take responsibility. That's not yeah, like, because the mud cake is haram. Yeah. And the bakery is
Mainly at Sydney.
What do you do there?
I work with Evangelical Union.
Okay. So you have a Muslim name and you work for the Evangelicals? How does that work?
It's a Christian name too.
Okay. So where are you from originally?
From Syria.
Syria. Okay. That's why it's Muslim. Okay, lovely. So are you Orthodox?
Yes, used to be.
Right.
Yeah.
But over here there's much.
Sorry?
There's not much Orthodox in that. So you join the Anglicans?
Yeah, basically.
They're very strong in the community.
Yeah. Well, we just call them Evangelicals.
Roman camps and
Yes, that's right. I've seen you around it.
What does Messiah mean? Because in my understanding, Messiah is different. God's chosen king. No, he's the king from when he raised and died, and he's the king now, and he comes back to judge the world.
Was that sorry?
I think the second coming is the same.
Well, it doesn't matter what I say.
Most likely. So when he came to Earth, lived, did his ministry, died and resurrected, that's his, like, fulfillment of the rule. So now everyone should.
So God created man in his own
And
image.
he's still ruling now.
God
But
created
he's been ruling.
man, and God blessed them. Fill the earth, so dominion over the fish, over the birds, the air, over everything that moves on the earth. God said, see, I give you every herb which you will see, which is on the face of the earth, every tree which you fruit which you shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, every bird, everything that creeps on the earth, which there is life, and every breed of everything that you see. So God has told us that we are alive also.
It's okay, that's yeah.
Food is probably pretty scarce. And it's the first time that God says, it's the first time. And whether people hate me before the flood, but then the original creation, there wasn't anything. Revelation talks about eternity, where a line will line and that, you won't get it. I'm not a vegetarian, I like mine. But I was
Oh, really? Relaxed and like for a minute I was just oh yeah, I know each oh, what
science makes an awful lot of mistakes.
I want to be clear. I've never said science over that.
If you're using science to interpret the Bible, that's the danger. You're saying that
I don't think this is necessarily like has to be set up to further.
So that you haven't given an assertion with no evidence or argument. I'll read you.
So do you think that?
Before you say, let me just read you something. So, then he goes on the last verse of the chapter 1, and God saw everything that he had made, and it was very good. So the evening and morning the sixth day. Then, thus the heavens and the earth, all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done. Rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he attended. He rested from all his work which God had created. This is the history of the heavens and the earth. Here is it. He stops 4 times actually. Past perfect. God finished his work. There's no more creation happening. Now, science actually know this is true. Because if evolution is true, you should be able to. No, because it matches with what the Bible says.
Yeah,
because about what? Well, no, you're not believing that the world is old. It doesn't make it old. It just doesn't. No one can squeeze billions of years into these generalities. The church would never have thought it. It's only since the Enlightenment that Catholics functioned now in this century that the church started to run with this. They capitulated to Jensen and his college said evolution is how you understand the earth. It's evolution. There's no such word as evolution. That's heresy. And no church believed in that. For recently, the history of the church. Well, I don't know if you feel as I'm not saying the Western world you're right. But I wouldn't put out there. I wouldn't very hesitant to put out there.
This person is saying,
At least
I'm talking about, you know, the rest of it. I think it'd be very, see, that's why I said it's not about numbers. It's not about numbers. It's about what the Bible says, and about what is exegetical, correctly exegetical. Most Christians, when it comes to this, make about creation. It's exegetical. I don't realise there's a difference. That when you bring something into the text to overrule the text, clear obvious thing. See, I've got a 14-year-old son. He reads this. He's 16.
Like after
When I was raising, when he was still 3, I was sitting in one place.
But yes,
It's fully evolutionary. Fully evolutionary long ages. This is where the indoctrination starts. You know, Richard Haddon. Sorry, David. He's only an economist, by the way, isn't he? What? He's only an economist. He's not a scientist. People think he's a scientist. He's not. Yeah, I'm just saying, you know, people think he's this great scientist. Look, I'll just read one passage. In this,
not really.
and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak as though the children of Israel, saying, surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it's a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know the one of the Lord who sanctifies you." That's the gospel. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you. Everyone that profanes it shall surely be put to death. Whoever doesn't work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. Work shall be done for 6 days. The seventh, as the Sabbath of God.
Yes,
holy to the Lord. Whoever doesn't work on the Sabbath, he shall be surely put to death. Therefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath throughout their generations. It's a perpetual covenant. It's a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day the rest of the refreshed. So we made an end of speaking with God. 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written in the Torah.
He's still coming in.
So we'll actually get started on the question about the nuclear family, right? Because I think it was an interesting question, right? So the question was, Andrew claimed that the nuclear family is a potential locus of alliance, and Abdullah, I think you mentioned the idea that perhaps that Islam has variances in family structure that doesn't make the nuclear family the only possible option, but irrespective of this nuclear family otherwise, I just want to get a sense in which we're all talking about the same thing. Right? So Andrew, do you want to just explain to the audience what you mean by the nuclear family?
So in God's word, in Genesis chapter 1, it says, "A man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife." Genesis 1, Genesis 2. and it talks about the two shall become one flesh, and as God speaks to Adam, he says, bear forth and multiply, or words to that effect. And so I think, generally speaking, Christians and Jewish people agree that it's one man, one wife, and children from that family. And so I think that's what my understanding of the nuclear family. Would you agree about that?
I mean, there have been, polygamy is a whole other discussion as to more than one wife. There has been that concept within the Jewish tradition. Generally, the idea of polygamy within Judaism was a fallback position. It was never a first position. So, the story with Abraham, he couldn't have any children with his wife, so he took on a second wife to have a child. So the purpose wasn't for the sake of companionship. The purpose was purely for the sake of, he couldn't procreate, and therefore with the one, so he got the second. But in basic principle, we find in our tradition that polygamy was a fallback position. It wasn't the optimal point. The optimal point was, as you said, one man, one woman, and children from that union. There's been, again, Judaism is, the answer to every question in Jewish law is not yes or no, it depends. So, there are many shades of grey, and there's been a lot of iterations throughout thousands of years. About 1,000 years ago, one of the great Jewish sages, Rabbi Gershom, based in the German area, he put out an edict to prohibit polygamy. So we Jews haven't been doing polygamy for about 1,000 years. The reasons for that I'm not going to go into at the moment. However, that only applied to what's called the Ashkenazi Jews, which are the Jews who are the Europeans. The Jews in Africa and in the Middle East weren't under that jurisdiction, and so they didn't take that on, and therefore they've had polygamy all the way through. So there are various iterations of that within the Jewish faith, but the basic principle of a male and female come together in sanctified union through marriage and having children, that is, we see that as the legal family. And we'll see Abdullah. I'm curious what Abdullah had in mind when he said that Islam is not so clear about or it's more nuanced. So let's hear that.
No, and the nuance is exactly as you just described, albeit without the Ashkenazi exceptionalism with polygyny, that the ideal and as is in the Quran, which means that we've been made of a pair, male and female. So the ideal is one husband, one wife, but in circumstances in which it is required, beneficial for the society, etc., then polygyny is an option, and it's an option in Islam that remains until this day. There's arguments about whether we can ever employ that option within a land that has a different law. So obviously in Australia, the Marriage Act is quite clear that it's two individuals to the exception of others. And so there's arguments that we follow that law of the land because it's certainly not compulsory for a man to marry multiple wives. But our position is the same. I guess the point that I would get across with this specifically, but then I'll get to a more general principle, is that whilst our default is a single husband with a single wife, it's not the only option, and so we need to be mindful of that when we consider that there are individuals that have lifestyles that are quite alien to what we believe to be correct, and I think that talking about the global concept, because this part of the discussion is emanating from truth and segueing from law. I think there's a principle in Islam, and I think, funnily enough, it's, I'll be bold enough to say that it's shared in Judaism, which is you can be correct when you are applying a law or interpreting a law, or you can be right. And sometimes they're not the same thing. So I think in the Jewish example, the differences between the houses of Hillel and Shema when it comes to practical application of law, and in Islam, and I would focus specifically on the Hanafi Madhab, there's a concept of maslahah, or communal benefit. The idea that perhaps there are laws that are clearly correct, but we can interpret them in a right way in circumstances where it's more right for the society, more right for a particular circumstance. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we turn laws on their head. But we have to be, I think, mindful of that concept, especially when we're thinking about ways that we can work together as faith communities and also faithless communities for communal benefit.
Thank you very much. Sounds good. Now, so we've got an idea that the nuclear family, and it seems to be what all parties are agreeing on in terms of definitions, is just the idea of one man, one woman. It's not necessarily the sociological construct of the idea of a nuclear family as distinct from the village, let's say, or the extended family that historically has been around for a very long time. If that's the case, just touching on this idea of family just a bit longer, is there, what's the, and this is actually, I'm asking Rabbi, more of a position of curiosity, because I've been reading a text very recently, Gerda Lerner's Creation and Patriarchy, and her thesis is that the Jewish scripture, with its sort of, when it came into civilization, it transformed society in the sense that it moved society from a polytheistic multiplicity worship of the divine feminine through to a worship of the singular ordered divine masculine, right, or the patriarch, right? And that's her criticism. She makes this book and she says that if you're going to trace the origins of patriarchal society, right, that is a useful moment in history, in the history of genealogy of patriarchy, to actually trace back to that moment, right? So my question to you, Rabbi, is what does the Jewish scripture say about family, about the masculine, about the feminine, about the role of husband, wife, mother, father? Not obviously, I assume that could be like a 3-hour talk, right, for sure. But at like a high level, and whether or not you feel as if the current prevailing sentiment really draws your religion's vision of family under question.
Thank you for that question. Now, it's very, very interesting that you talk about this book, and a lot of people write a lot of books, and because someone wrote a book and printed it and it's got a shiny cover doesn't mean that all of its axioms are correct, or that I have to agree with them. So she may have put forward this hypothesis, and I respect all of her research, but at the end of the day, I respectfully disagree with her. And that is that I don't see Judaism as a patriarchal religion at all. I see it as looking at the roles of the masculine and feminine as being different, but not exalting one over the other. It starts off from the beginning when you have Adam and Eve, and then you have God takes a part of Adam and words and read or whatever it is, however you interpret that. And I love the way Abdullah was talking about interpretation, because interpretation and nuance is very important in our application of religion at all times, particularly in the modern times. And so we can, and what he said absolutely correctly was you can be right conceptually, but wrong when it comes to application, because that principle may not apply in a certain circumstance. And in fact, that could actually be deleterious. So, there's one interpretation in relation to Adam and Eve, that actually they were created as the Zohar, which is one of the mystical teachings of Judaism, says that Adam and Eve were actually created in beginning as one being, which were actually two bodies. It wasn't just a rib, it was actually two bodies who were like Siamese twins sort of connected. And then God separated them and then brought them back together as husband and wife. So the idea is not that the female is some type of, according to the Zohar, according to the Kabbalistic teachings of Judaism, it's not the female is some sort of spare part. He took out the spare part of Adam and then he created a woman out of it. Actually, originally it was two beings as part of this one, separated and then brought back together. And then the Zohar takes it a step further and says, actually, it's like that with every husband and wife, that we believe in our tradition that the male and the female, of course we all have a soul, so when we're born, a soul comes into our body, and the scriptures talk about the breath of life, God's breath of life coming into Adam, and we all have a soul, and we believe that your life doesn't begin when you're born, your soul comes from heaven, and it's there beforehand, it's a pre-existing entity, and your life doesn't end at death, that when you die, and I definitely know that Christianity and Islam, concur with the idea of the afterlife and the fact that, life continues, your soul continues after death. So we all agree about that the soul is this eternal, existing being, spiritual being that is there before you're born, continues after you die, and gives life to your body during the period of your days on earth. So getting back to the point that the Zohar was saying, that male and female are actually, before you're born, you and your future wife to be or husband to be were actually one soul in heaven. Then they got split. So when you were born and when your spouse was born, two halves of the same soul have been put into, and then you've got to find your soul partner, your soulmate, which is the other half of your soul from our tradition. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's that it's actually two halves of the one whole, which come back together. So romantic, I know. And I actually mention this every time I officiate at a wedding. I say it's two halves of the one soul coming back together, and that's really what we believe. So it's a very beautiful concept. And so the idea is we take that a step further. And some people may theologically disagree with this, but this is a very Jewish concept. That the ideas of the masculine and feminine energies, because this masculine soul, feminine soul, actually two halves of the same soul, they're two different aspects of the same energy, and each one has its own unique energy, is when we say that man is created in the image of God, the soul, it's not the body of man, it's the soul of man and woman. And those two energies are actually in the image of God. God has both male and female energy. So when we pray in the Jewish tradition, there are times we refer to God as a male, and we say in the blessings, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed be you, and you in Hebrew, atah is male, referring to God as a male. And then there are times in the prayer where we say, Nakdishach v'naritzach, where we refer to God, we sanctify you, refer to God as a female. And we actually refer to God's presence as the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which is a feminine term. So we actually believe that the female energy and the male energy are both manifestations of different parts of God. And so we definitely don't look at God as being patriarchal and the feminine as being secondary. No, not at all. We believe that all those different energies are part of the one God, and that's manifest in mankind, in the image of God, through males and females. That's what I have to say. Interesting. Yeah. Were we up to one of the other speakers?
Yeah, I'd love to hear the other speakers as well. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think we agree broadly on the first point, right? That male and female are equal but distinct, and so they have different roles. But I don't think the scriptures ever highlight one over another, only except in the case of grotesque sin, where in Genesis chapter 6, chapter 5, Lamech is sort of bringing wives and taking them around, and he's like, I've got all the wives, basically. And so in one sense, it's only in the case of sin where man exerts his dominance over woman and thinks he's more valuable, they have a higher worth. But it's actually, as we see the gospel revealed, we see Jesus actually serving and caring for all the people that he sees, male or female. When he enters into a town, he cares not whether the sick is a man or if they're a female, and he serves all. He says in Mark's Gospel in chapter 10, he says, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." So that's what Jesus came to do. So as much as this author might say, the Abrahamic religion is the one that created the patriarchy, I disagree also, but I actually would say it's actually through the Abrahamic religions, and of course I'm going to say through the propagation of Christianity into Christendom in Europe, that actually you see the worth of women. And Tom Holland has come to that same conclusion, who's an atheist in Dominion, his book.
Abdullah, we're up to you, man.
Sorry, I just had to unmute that. I agree completely. To be honest, the notion that the Abrahamic faiths are inherently patriarchal is cliche to the point of being a trope really now. I honestly think that, as kind as you were, Ellie, I honestly think that a lot of these scholars or interpreters come with an opinion already, and then they build their interpretations around their pre-existing opinion. I think someone who objectively reads the Hebrew scriptures, I think even portions of Christian scriptures and certainly the Quran, would have to acknowledge that women, for example, receive revelation from God. So Sarah receives a direct revelation, Hagar receives a direct revelation, Miriam receives a direct revelation. This, more than anything else, illustrates the status of women in our faiths. Nothing is more important to us than being able to see, experience God, and repeatedly, it's emphasised in all three of our texts that women share that experience. There's a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, which parallels, I think, quite well a portion of Proverbs. The Prophet ﷺ is asked a question about what attributes should he consider in selecting a bride. And the Prophet illustrates that socially people get married for several reasons, including beauty, wealth, social status. But in fact, the reason that one should select a bride is piety. And if you select any other reason, then you will be a loser in marriage and therefore in life. In Esha's trail, Ellie will be able to say better than me, but I think it's beauty is vain. Only a woman that fears the Lord is to be praised or acknowledged. So I think that, as I said, first of all, the status of women is quite clear in the text. Have people interpreted things over time to be convenient for themselves? Well, absolutely. That goes without saying. And I think in those instances they've been absolutely incorrect. We also obviously do differentiate between roles, and I think that this is a concept that seems to be challenging a lot of people, contemporarily, which doesn't seem to have challenged human beings in the past. So even the polytheistic nations in the ancient Near East and really any civilization that we can do research on and study their history had a concept of the masculine and the feminine, and these were even the ones that had feminine deities that they worshipped. Now we seem to be in a situation where differentiating the masculine and the feminine, so having a difference, necessarily makes a status, you know, so the idea that if we differentiate between men and women in any way, well then one must be better than the other. But in fact, it's role differences, not, as I said, you know, role priorities. You know, my responsibilities as a father are not exactly the same as my wife's responsibilities as a mother. That doesn't mean that they're any less important to one another or that one is more important than the other. And whilst it's not a conversation that I particularly want to get into, I mean, we're seeing the manifestation of this social confusion now, for me most profoundly in the conversation around transgender women and sport. And obviously it's an entirely secular conversation at the moment. You know, we're not involved in it, and, you know, I mean, quite frankly, I don't really want to be involved in the conversation. But the idea that difference necessitates a priority of one over the other, it really is a category error. And I think it's causing a lot of confusion in society now.
I think just to add a point to what Abdullah was saying in relation to revelation in the scriptures being to both men and to women, there's actually an interesting anecdote, an episode that happens in Genesis where, you know, Abraham and Sarah have a bit of a disagreement, and Abraham consults with God, and God says, whatever Sarah says, that's what you should do. Whatever Sarah tells you, you listen to her voice. So God is essentially saying, giving, in a way, he's giving supersedence to the wife over the husband, and says, well, if there's a disagreement, then you've got to go with what she wants. So to turn that around, and again, as I said, with all due respect to this author that you've been reading, and say that we're a patriarchal faith, I think we're wrong. But moving on.
Yeah, cool. I think the topic of three monotheistic religions and their respective institutionalizations of particular forms of the masculine and feminine is probably a event in itself, right? So we'll move right on. The next question that I had, which will be the last question, because I want to get audience participation very soon, yeah? The last question that I had was about the religious discrimination bill, right? Specifically about the idea of Islamic schools, Jewish schools, and Christian schools having sufficient levels of autonomy to recreate the social world that they want to see, right, in their domestic space. Because, and then this is something that's quite interesting to me, because the secular promise was that religion stays out of politics and politics will stay out of religion, right? With it, the way it currently stands, it's almost a one-way street, in the sense that religion does try to stay out of politics, but if politics, it does make its way into the household, it does make its way into the schools, the families, and the way in which, I guess, religious communities are trying to bring up the children. So what do we, this is where I assume us three would actually converge in terms of interest. We do want to see that. So is there something that you guys want to say about the current dynamic, current climate, and how we might form, I guess, prudential alliances just to get these domestic issues in order to have this kind of image? Yeah, Andrew, inside.
Yeah. Little tidbit about history in Australia. The first schools were actually run by religious organisations. Christians started the first schools, and actually we gave that autonomy back to the state. In return,
why'd you do that?
Well, at the time we were on talking terms, and at that time,
bad idea, bro. That was a bad deal.
Well, what we got in return was special religious education. And so in state schools now, there is an obligation for state schools to offer special religious education, which they're also trying to undo, of course. But in one sense, it's the religious value that is to educate and continue, whereas If I was secular, I don't think I'd want people as smart as me. Then they wouldn't have to listen to what I have to say. I might want my kids to be as smart as me, so then people would listen to what they have to say, but I don't want education to be available for all people. Because then maybe I'm threatened, or my position is threatened. I don't want my manager at work, who might be below me if I'm higher up. I don't want him overtaking me and being smarter. I would want any sort of discrimination in religion, and so it's actually I think a religious value to educate and such. And I think we all converge on that. We think education is important, not just in name but in practice. And because of that, we've actually opened up schools that not only teach our faiths. Our schools are not devoid of any academia. We have rigorous academic discussion in our schools that actually teach people about maths and literature and science. And we want people to learn about those things, because the better people can learn about the world, the better they can actually know God who created it. And so I think one of the great touch points that we land on is that we want people to learn about the world, and we want people to grow in their understanding of the world. Why that is, it might differ between the secular and the religious, but yeah, I think it's a great blessing to teach others. We're rabbi, teacher, minister, teacher, sheikh or imam, teacher, and so we value teaching. Ravid is a teacher, and so it's actually you'll find a greater number of teachers from religious background. I think if you did the analysis, it's because we want to teach.
Abdullah.
Thank you. Look, I'll be honest, I'm probably one of the few people that really doesn't have any particular concern about the religious discrimination bill. I think that politically it's more of a chain around the government's neck than anything else. I mean, for anyone that's read portions of the bill, or in particular the portions that the opposition and the minor parties and independents have tried to have deleted, it really, for me, I think talks about a lot of ridiculous scenarios that are just unlikely to manifest. I mean, perhaps they might, but I really can't envisage them being particularly likely. So, one of the portions that laid by the Greens, independents, and then also, I think it was 5 of the members of the Liberal Party wanted deleted, was a section around religious schools being able to discriminate on the basis of sexuality, essentially. And I seriously cannot imagine a situation where someone who would be, looked upon unfavourably because of a particular faith position would then want to go and work at a school that holds that faith position. I mean, perhaps there are people who are genuine gluttons for punishment, or just want to be troublemakers. But for me, it's up there with the whole wedding cake for marriages that are not approved of by a particular religion, and the baker being religious. So I just don't think that there are genuine situations where people are going to walk into these hypothetical bakeries and want these hypothetical bakers to do such a thing. So I think really it's kind of a protection against nothing. I'm probably one of the few people who whilst I acknowledge that there's a huge benefit to special religious education, that in New South Wales public schools, I actually find it now more frustrating, than anything else. As a parent of children who are going to a public school. Funnily enough, I think the majority of my friends who are teachers and non-Muslim teachers seem to love it, because it's guaranteed time that they can catch up on work in school hours. So I don't think it's going anywhere Professor Emerita at the University of Sydney, Susanna Rutland, just recently, it was about 12 or 18 months ago, published a paper about the benefits of special religious education in New South Wales, secular benefits, and I think even for those reasons alone, that the teachers actually like it by and large for the time that it gives them, and that there are recognised benefits. It will continue. I mean, I don't think that it's going to be eliminated. Look, for me, as I said earlier, I think that we're always walking this tightrope, between being correct and being right for the circumstances. And one of the best examples of this practice in the life of the Prophet ﷺ is when a man who was not a Muslim walked into the Prophet's mosque in Medina while the Prophet and a number of his close companions were there. He didn't know this man what the building was, and he walked into a corner and urinated in it. Now, some of the Prophet's companions wanted to react belligerently, and the Prophet ﷺ forbade this type of reaction. He instructed them that the most important thing is to educate the uneducated, in this circumstance. It may have been correct from a legal perspective, to punish the person, for undertaking this act. They've made an area of the house of worship impure. But what the right thing to do was to educate this individual in a supportive way, so that they actually understand why what they're doing is a problem. And I think that's one of the traps that we just fall into too often. We get focused about being correct from a black and white perspective, and it doesn't actually pan out properly in practice in terms of achieving any of our objectives, other than getting to pat ourselves on the back for knowing the right answer.
Thanks, Abdullah. Farhan, do you want to open it up to the audience in terms of questions? I believe you had a website that you wanted everyone to go to, is that correct? So he was telling me about some website that apparently the audience can participate in quite easily. What's it called?
SLI.
Slido? Oh yeah. Go onto your phones, go onto sli.do and check in with the code 300-770.
If you're a Luddite.
A Luddite?
Yes.
Doesn't have a smartphone.
Oh,
Ask the bloke next to you to put the question through.
You can just scream it out, man, if you want.
Okay, I'll wait till the first.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
Well, I think Farhan, the first one's for you.
First one's for you, mate.
Oh, yeah? Is the UNSWMSA president single?
Like, the real question is, which female in the room soul are you linked with?
Sure.
No, we'll skip that one.
Alright, so this is actually a great question to Rabbi. Oh my God. The question is, Rabbi, if you think that man and woman are two halves of the soul, are people who remain unmarried of lesser value or somehow less than whole human?
The answer is of course not, because every single person is created in the image of God, and therefore life is infinite. The soul is infinite. So you can't sort of, yes, there's the female energy and there's the male energy, and they're both infinite. And when they come together, you get a new entity which is also infinite, right? So you can't say one infinite is better than another infinite. But yes, when a person does get married, and when a husband and wife come together in marital love and sanctity, there is an advantage to each of them that they didn't have before. I've now got connected with the female energy within half of myself, and she's my dear wife. Has the benefit of my male energy. So absolutely, I mean, when you get married, you do have that benefit of the opposite gender energy, which you didn't have beforehand. It doesn't mean that you're better or worse. You see that and I think Abdullah was talking about this before when talking about gender role in society, and people saying if a woman can't do everything that a man does, or a man can't do everything that a woman does, then one is better than the other. No. We're all, as the scriptures tell us, every human is created in the image of God. Every life is precious and eternal. We're not going to measure one as being better or worse than another, or greater than another. But yes, most definitely, there is benefit to being married, and that's why we do it. Because there's benefit. Because there is a commandment by God to say, as Andrew said before, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife and become one flesh. I mean, it's a commandment from God. Be fruitful and multiply. Come together, be married, and so that there is benefit to it, and it is a mitzvah. It's a good deed. It's a holy thing to do in life. But you're not better than the person who's single now.
Cool. This one is for Andrew. Christianity is a expansionary religion in its evangelical sense, but it ceased becoming Christendom for a long time. Why?
Why did it stop?
On the political side.
Yeah.
Why is Christianity no longer a political movement?
Yes. I don't think it was ever destined to be a political movement. Jesus always spoke about the kingdom of God in a spiritual sense, more than he spoke about it in a physical sense. He taught in John's Gospel in chapter 2. He says he's in the temple and he's overturned the table. And he says, "Tear down this temple and I'll build it again in 3 days." And his earliest follower and the person who wrote it says, but the temple he was talking about was his body, and after he died, and we believe was raised, the apostles and the disciples remembered what he had talked about, and that they actually believed that so the temple is a sacred thing, right? It's where God dwells, and so God dwells in Jesus, but that's what we believe. And so in one sense, it was never meant to be a physical kingdom, but it almost, the physical sort of aspect of Christianity expanding served as a way to increase the spiritual reality of the kingdom that is spoken of in the New Testament. And so when the physical conquerors and colonizers came to Australia, there was chaplains, and they taught the people the word, and they taught Aboriginals the word. People who'd never heard of Jesus before, never even heard of Jerusalem and Israel and Palestine and whatever, right? They'd never heard of these places. They'd never seen foreigners before, were taught about who Jesus is because of the physical expansion of the British Empire. Now, whether the British Empire was trying to bring about a political sort of Christendom, that's up for debate.
Roman Empire was.
The Roman Empire was, and so, but even that failed. And so, the mere failure of the empire actually signifies that it wasn't destined to be, and that God had a better reality in mind. And so, in one sense, the failure of Christendom highlights that the reality of the kingdom was always meant to be spiritual.
That perhaps a little bit, I don't want to use the word convenient, but it is a little bit of convenience that moment happens historically at the same time as the fall of empire and the rise of nation states. So, so now I'm going to turn question to Rabbi, because this is also a sort of question here. Do you believe that in order for there to be political grounding for a particular people, that there needs to be a social political homeland?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously it's specific in relation to the state of Israel and the Jewish people. The connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel is sort of fundamental to our faith. God tells Abraham, "I promise you this land," multiple times in the Torah. So it's fundamental to God. There's three pillars within Jewish identity. There's the people of Israel, the actual people. There's the Torah of Israel, which is our faith and our traditions and our values. And there's the land of Israel, which is our homeland. So those three are pillars in our identity. That's from a Jewish point of view. There could be, if you ask the question from a broader point of view in relation to does every faith need a homeland? I can't answer that because it depends on the nature of the faith, right? So, Christianity, as Andrew just said now, it's more of an idea than an actual physical place, and that idea can be anywhere at any time. I don't know where Islam stands. I'm sure there are different strands within Islam which talk about whether a caliphate is something that's required or not in order to see that the outcome of Islam in its fruition. But from a Jewish point of view, it's those three are the pillars of Jewish identity. So throughout history, we've had at times we've had all three. There were times that we only had two. So there were periods of time from the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago by the Romans until the establishment of the modern state of Israel, in 1948. So for a couple of thousand years, we had the people of Israel and the Torah of Israel, but we didn't have the land of Israel as a place where there was a homeland for the Jewish people. There were Jews living there throughout thousands of years at all time, but it wasn't a sort of a modern political state. But yeah, other faiths may have different, as Andrew made clear, that Christendom is not, at least from his point of view, a requirement to have a political, physical space for the realization of the Christian idea. But in Judaism, it is required, which means to say that without the land of Israel, we can't fulfill completely our identity as Jews. And there are a number of the 613 commandments in the Torah. A couple of hundred of them are connected to laws specifically associated with the land of Israel, with the building of the temple, and with the physical structure of that state. So that's my answer to that question.
Interesting. So, as it currently stands, it seems like the idea of political community, social community, is closely attached to having that homeland for Jews.
For Jewish people, yes.
For the Jewish people, yes. My question is, what advice would you give to Muslims that also have aspirations in terms of having a homeland for the Muslim faith? Because it seems like the Jewish community is far more organized, far more mobilized. Hopefully that's not an anti-Semitic. that's not the. But
it took 2,000 years of diaspora.
That's true. It did take 2,000 years. It's correct. And when I say more organized, I'm just comparing it to the Muslim community, so it's not really a compliment by any stretch of the imagination. But would you have any overarching, I guess, in terms of how diaspora is external to the homeland, right, can support, enable, and give strength to the idea of a central homeland?
It's an interesting question you ask. I mean, Islam is numerically far more superior from a numbers point of view than the Jewish numbers. We've got, if we did a poll here, how many Jews around the world, people would be shocked to hear there's about 18 million, 15 million. That's a very small number. 20 million will be maximum. It will be it's somewhere between the 15 and 20 million mark. We're talking about people who identify as Muslim. I think we're close to 1 billion. So we're talking, about 50 times the amount of people who identify as Muslim than those who are Jewish. I think Christianity, we're talking up to 2 billion. So we're talking, the numbers are just completely incomparable. And also, there are many more Muslim states. I mean, the Islamic Republic of Iran, that's an Islamic republic, right? There are 26, I believe, I can't say the exact number, but I think there are about 26 countries on planet Earth which Islam is the primary religion. So that not all of those countries are run by Sharia, but there's definitely respect given to Sharia in many of those countries, particularly in the Middle East. But then you have even countries like Indonesia, which closer to Australia, which is a Muslim majority country. So I'm not familiar enough with the theology of Islam in relation to how a Muslim person's identity as a Muslim is a connection to a particular place. And I don't know enough about the Islamic theology, but there are many places on earth which are definitely Muslim majority, and there are some which actually are run by Sharia, including Afghanistan, which is now run by a very strict version of Sharia. I mean, that's an Islamic state, if you count that. So that's my answer to your question. I think you're underestimating the power of Islam, the numbers of Islam, the amount of countries on earth which ascribe to Islam. But I'm not sure whether Islam actually within its, and Abdullah would be far more knowledgeable than me on this, whether in its scriptures see one specific land as a place for it to, for a central focal point, there are holy places. I mean, it's interesting when I went out for the break to pray and I saw all my Muslim cousins. You call each other brothers and sisters, but we can call you cousins. So I saw my Muslim cousins praying, and we pray to a specific direction. We pray to Jerusalem. I believe that in the Islamic tradition, we pray to Mecca, right? Now, from Australia, it's the same direction. So we're both praying in the same direction, It's northwest, right? So we're both praying in the same direction, just a bit further. But I think Mecca is a sort of a central Saudi Arabia again. That's a major Islamic country which is run definitely respecting Sharia law. And I think it's quite a strong Islamic country. So I don't know whether Mecca plays that role as the central place for Muslim people and their connection to that, or whether it's more nuanced, and maybe Abdullah can speak to that.
Funnily enough, when it comes to this political stuff, I think that Ravi was probably a better place than me, but I think that there is a bit of a parallel in terms of some laws being specific to regions that are now encompassed by Saudi Arabia in Mecca, Medina. There are particular religious sacraments that are specific to these regions. So there is a regional connection there, so to speak. I think one of the critical differences, and you might disagree with me in this area, but I think one of the critical differences between people that will sort of draw parallels between the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, and the concept of re-establishing a khilafah for Muslims, it isn't even so much the numbers. I think it's that the basis and then the implementation would be quite different. So my argument would be that Israel is a secular state. It was founded intentionally as a secular state, and that religious authorities are permitted by the government to make rules about things that matter to them. So, for example, the definition of marriage in Israel and who can get married to each other in Israel is set by the two chief rabbinates. However, as Ellie was pointing out, up until relatively recent modern history, and still continuing now, a number of Yemeni Jews that have immigrated to Israel and Ethiopian Jews that have immigrated to Israel practice polygyny and then have their marriages, acknowledged in Israel. And Ellie might be able to clarify for me, but I think Israel will acknowledge also same-sex marriages that are conducted outside of the state. So Israel was intentionally founded as a secular state that kind of gives religious authorities, some opportunity to dictate things that matter to them. anyone who is arguing for the re-establishment of a Khilafah will necessarily be arguing from a religious perspective. Because as Eli rightly pointed out, there are Muslim majority countries, all across the equator. And just because they're Muslim majority or they claim to, rule in a manner that is, let's say, inspired by or directed by Islamic law, doesn't mean that they do those things. If that were the case, given that, and I'd say that we're probably closer to the 2 billion number now, if that were the case, we wouldn't have Muslims being persecuted in places where they are in minority, like the Uyghurs in China and the Rohingya in Burma. We would be using our power, the 2 billion of us in countries where we are in the majority, to rescue them. But we're certainly not doing that. So being in a majority doesn't necessarily mean that things are actually implemented properly. But as I said, I think the comparison, and maybe this is an academic point, but the comparison between the modern state of Israel and the concept of Khilafah is flawed at the foundation, because one is inherently secular and the other is completely religious.
Interesting.
Thank you so much, Abdullah, for answering that question. Do we have time for one more? Or
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah. Okay. It was going to come up. What do Jews and Christians believe about homosexuality?
It took us 2.5 hours.
we did all right. We did all right. Should we go? Let's just wrap the night off in chronological order.
We're traditionalists. We have our sacred texts. We don't change our sacred texts. What it says in our sacred text, we adhere to. And I'd say that that would apply to Judaism as well as Christianity and Islam. That we're not going to change what it says in our sacred texts. And so everyone knows what it says in the Bible. You don't need me to start quoting Leviticus and all that.
Okay, I'll quote the New Testament.
So we know what it says. We know that the traditional view of sexuality from a Jewish point of view, at least, is that it's between a male and a female. But again, what Abdullah was saying was that you can be right, but you have to be wise. And being right and being wise is not always the same. And so yes, there's the traditional view as it's put forward in the Holy Scriptures to say that the sexuality is reserved between a male and a female. But having said that, if someone chooses to express their sexuality in another way, in a homosexual way, if that's what they choose, then the question becomes, how should we treat people who are homosexual? And then, of course, the answer is with compassion, with love. There are 613 commandments in the Torah, right? One of them is a prohibition to homosexual sex. That's one of the 613, but there's another 612. So, I run a congregation, in Newtown, which is the second oldest synagogue in Sydney. And many of my congregants are homosexual. They don't hide that fact. They're welcome in the synagogue. They can participate fully in Jewish communal life. They know what it says in the Scripture, and they also know that they're not going to ask me to officiate at a same-sex marriage. They know that I won't. But having said that, they will still, we can agree to disagree on this one and still have a meaningful communal life with the other 612. And so therefore, they feel comfortable, they're made to feel welcome and not discriminated against. So we have to have that nuance of being able to say, this is what it says in the Scriptures, we're not going to change it. But if someone, for whatever reason, chooses to live a different lifestyle to that which is set forward in the Scriptures, the question is, how do we relate to them and how do we include them in the community? And the answer is as lovingly as possible. That's the Jewish approach. And I'm sure we'll hear from the Christian, from Andrew and from Abdullah as well.
I'll quickly read out a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 6. This was quoted a little bit without the context from Israel Folau, which kicked up all the controversy. So hopefully no one will cancel me from being a premier football player. And so this is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, "Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." I used to work in tax consulting, so I put myself in the greedy list. And I used to drink quite a bit, so I also put myself in the drunkards list. I never practiced homosexuality, but it says, none of them will inherit the kingdom of God. The next verse is the beautiful key verse in the passage where it says, "And such were some of you." So Paul is talking to some people who might have practiced homosexuality. It says, "You are like this, you are not inheriting the kingdom of God." And then he says, "But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of God." And so, in one sense, homosexuality is a sin and it is prohibited. But in another sense, when you come to Jesus, you bring all sorts of baggage with you and all sorts of sins with you, and all of them prevent you access to the Holy God. The way forward is to repent of the things that you do and to live for Jesus as your King and as your servant, and in utter submission and service to Him. And so you can be homosexual, but you have to turn away from the practice of homosexuality when you turn to Jesus. Whether that's immediate or whether it takes time, that might be up for discussion. Such is the nature of our fallen state of humanity, where sins do linger. But at the end of the day, practicing homosexuality is sinful, and we encourage all people who trust in Jesus to reject and kill sin in their own lives, no matter what the sins are. For those who are same-sex attracted, who might be either whether you think it's a choice or whether you think it's you're born that way, as some people might say, "I was born this way." Well, the Bible tells you to not act on that desire. And there are a couple of people who I listen to and I trust who are same-sex attracted Christian ministers, who accept Orthodox Christianity, who actually practice to be chaste, to not have sex, because they don't want to marry a woman. They're attracted to men, but they're not going to act on their desires. And it's a great and wonderful thing that they are actually saying, actually, I value the Word of God above my own desire, and I'm going to kill the sin that I could be having in my own life in order to preserve what God is saying in the Scriptures. And I think that's a very humble and loving thing that these Christians do, and I think they're brave and courageous for it. I think that's what real bravery is knowing what your body wants and saying, no, actually I'm going to live God's way, rather than what some people think is courageous to say, oh, my body wants this and I'm going to say yes.
Abdullah.
Look, it's a vexing question, because I mean, at the end of the day, I would be breaching modesty laws as they apply to myself if I get concerned about what other people do in their bedrooms. I think the most important thing is exactly what Eli said, that we treat other human beings with compassion, regardless of what they think, feel, or do. So long as obviously they're not harming us, harming other people, we first and foremost have to treat them all with compassion. I'll unfurl the flag and say that there's a fundamental difference between what I believe and what Andrew believes. From my perspective, I'm not a perennialist. I don't think that all pathways are right. So, from an Islamic perspective, anybody who believes that Jesus is God, whether it's in a triune sense or some dualist sense or even a Unitarian sense. If you believe that any man is God or a manifestation of God, that is necessarily polytheism. The Jewish concept, Avodah Zarah, that's exactly what we hold it to be. And from our perspective, there is no sin that's greater than polytheism. Now, just as Andrew said, quoting Paul, sin today doesn't mean that people aren't forgiven tomorrow. And in fact, one of the better examples from the Prophet Muhammad is when he was teaching companions, using what is essentially a parable about a harlot, about a prostitute who had committed, as part of her daily life, a huge amount of sin. And she went to a well to get water, and as she came out, she noticed an animal that was thirsty. And so she gave that animal water first, and for that reason, all of her sins were forgiven by God. We have another parable about a man who killed 99 people and was told that if he travelled to a certain town and prayed there, he would be able to be forgiven by God. And on his way to this particular town, he got in an argument with someone on the road and killed that person. So he killed 100 people. And then God sent the angels to measure whether this man was closer to that town or not from his origin. And if he was closer, he would forgive him. And as the angels were going, they measured and found that he was exactly equidistant between his origin and the destination. And then the divine hand moved the man a fraction closer to his destination, and he was forgiven. He was forgiven for his intent to seek the forgiveness of God. So it's not for me to judge individual people or particular sins. As Eli said and Andrew said, we have our particular morality and we shouldn't be ashamed of it. I'm certainly not ashamed of my moral views, but it's not my job to impose those upon other people. And just to round out my awareness of the three traditions, and I've already referenced it earlier tonight. I think that this concept is best summarised in an anecdote about the sage Hillel, when a prospective student came to him and said, "I want you to summarise the Torah standing on one leg." And another great sage that was with Hillel at the time walked away in disgust. He refused to partake in a belittling act such as this. Hillel said, "Sure." He stood on one foot. He said, "Treat others as you want to be treated. The rest is commentary. Get on and learn it." And that's it. And that's essentially the key thing, as I was saying, that unites us. We believe necessarily that God has created us all intentionally and therefore with a purpose. That necessarily means we all have the same origin and therefore should treat each other in the same way. And as long as we go forward with that as a foundation, we're only going to win.
That was brilliant. I just wanted to say a postscript to our discussion, and that is our dear friend, the moderator, who's done a lovely job. A round of applause for him. He's done a great job bringing this together in a respectful and intelligent way that's helped enrich people's understanding of each other while respecting different views. So well done to you. We spoke about, when you were at uni, interfaith dialogue was sort of an excuse for PR or something like that. It wasn't really meaningful. I think today was meaningful. So, as someone who spoke, I feel that I learned from the other speakers and from the questions as well. So I thank you all for that. The last time I did an interfaith experience here at Sydney at UNSW was about a few years ago. Unfortunately, there was that terrible massacre in Christchurch in New Zealand, at the mosque there, a couple of mosques. And so the Muslim Society here arranged, there was a a table on campus where they were selling biscuits, and the proceeds were going to the victims of the terrorist attack, and the Jewish Union was invited to participate, as was the Catholic society. And so it was the three faiths coming together in respect for those worshippers who were killed, innocently during their act of worship, and for our shared humanity. And I think, as Andrew said before, and as Abdullah was talking about, and it was mentioned throughout the night, is the idea of that one thing that is a common denominator amongst all of us is the idea of caring for those who are in need and reaching out to clothe the naked and feed the hungry. And I think that if our next, and I'm putting a challenge to the organisers, that if the next interaction between our faiths can be one that benefits others. Tonight's benefited us and enriched our understanding, but I think next time we come together we should do something that's going to be of benefit to those in need, whether it's selling cookies for the victims. I mean, there's plenty of manifestations of being able to do acts of charity, but I think that's where we excel. We excel as a faith and as whichever faith we're in when we're of service to humanity. So I think that's my challenge. Next time we get together, we're going to try and do something that's going to, and if the organisers can think about that, try and do something that's going to be a benefit to those in need, regardless of faith or religion or colour or creed. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eli. Just to close out on my end, I just looked on my phone on the slider and there's over 60 questions on there. I work with Campus Bible Study, and Campus Bible Study loves questions. We think questions are the way people learn.
So do we.
Yep. And so we encourage you to have questions with us, and not just me up the front, but actually there's a few Christians around here. And why don't you get in contact with them and talk to them and get their phone number and ask them the questions. We think we grow when we ask each other questions and learn from each other, and we actually get to experience God fully when we actually bring our questions to Him rather than hide them in the dark. So I encourage you, if you ask the question, it might not have gotten answered, you can come and find me, but if you find a Christian, you can talk to them and get their details, and they'll be happy to meet with you, and I might be too.
Thank you so much for tonight. I think I'll leave it to Farhan to conclude the night. Yeah, great discussion. Good banter. Do it again next week.
But Farhan, are you single, bud? We still don't know.
Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm not saying. Yeah, I think overall it's really insightful discussion. I'm sure everyone here learned a lot about each other. Just a token of thanks from the MSA, we do have some gifts for the speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Abdullah Dori will probably post your gift over to you. Before you guys go, I do want to show you guys, we do have one more final sort of initiative. So I'll just get it up. Yeah, so this is basically a Jesus exhibition that will be hosting out on the library lawn next week Tuesday at UNSW. And essentially it's going to be like a really interactive sort of exhibition where we cover the life of Jesus, peace be upon him, in a very interactive manner. And a lot of our volunteers and stuff will be there. I strongly encourage all Christians and Jewish attendees to also come by. It will be a great chance to sort of have a chat, conversate, have a discussion, dialogue. So yeah, that's basically that. Thank you all for coming. Up the back, we do have some leftover snacks, I believe. So on the way out, feel free to grab some snacks. Sign the ARC attendance form if you haven't. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.